6 bundles.
What we've already
Okay, well, Jerry wants me to talk about. Oh, turn it on.
Yeah.
All right. Where's the on? There you go. Mike, can you hear me now?
No.
Nope.
Can I push it
There
the
you
wrong
go.
way?
Yep.
Okay, well, this is the maintenance shop and the main office here on your left, and then off to your right is the paper machine buildings that are left. There were three paper machines, and those buildings are still intact. You can see the vents coming up off of near the roof line there. That's where the exhaust came off from the dryers on the paper machine. The bleach plant was just to the east of these buildings, which is bleach plant is completely gone. And then this area out in here, which is just a grassy area now with weeds, this used to be the recosticizing, which is part of the process to turn the chemicals back into cooking chemicals. That's basically it right here.
The list of sites mentions a couple of foundations. We'll get there.
Yeah, well,
We're not there yet. Okay.
Well, no, we've gone by those because we can't access them.
Keep the microphone away.
It'd be nice to be able to get out and walk around, but now they said that we can't do that. The next place that we're going to come up to is...
Larry, could you talk into the microphone?
Oh, I'm getting feedback here when I do that. We'll stop up here at the PCB storage site where they remove dirt for PCB contamination, and it should be obvious when we get there, but I haven't actually seen it, so I assume that the fresh gravel has been put in to replace the removed material. You're going to go left down here, right?
No, we're going to go back to the very beginning.
Okay, forget about
the
the PCB storage site.
So they just follow that road down the back of the machine building.
This area here is where the paper was loaded onto rail cars and trucks to be transported out. So all these open places here is just handling the large rolls that weighed 2.5 tons apiece. So they were not something you could take home in your lunchbox. Well, the maximum tonnage that they made was 1,850 tons per day. And at the end, they shut down one of the machines, and they were producing about 1,400, 1,500 tons a day. And that was linerboard. That's the inside and outside facings of a cardboard box. And that was made into boxes down, and most of it went to Los Angeles. So a lot of box plants in Los Angeles were took our linerboard.
You think that's what Mike has, that big roll?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Well, the max was 1,850
Oh, it's linerboard, yeah.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Well, it was over several years. Now we're coming around the backside here. Now they talk about a high density storage. Now this big concrete structure right here that we're going by is a high density storage, but the one that they had the PCBs around was at the foundation of another one. And so...
Okay, so if you stop the bus, I'm going to walk out and stand where the PCB
Yeah, just let her turn around first.
Okay.
Go in here.
So what I'm going to do is we had 2 PCB removals that happened at this site last year. I'm going to walk out and I'm going to show you a location out here of one of them. It's been filled in. There is a lot of cement out there and rebar. It's very dangerous walking out there, but I do want you to see where the location of the removal took place.
So we're kind of back on track for the tour, so we're stopping at... We're kind of back on track for the tour, so on your list there, we're at locations 2, 3, and 4 at the same time.
Are we being followed?
And then Sarah's walking out to number 4 where the removal was at. The first removal for the high density pulp tank.
When did that happen?
And that happened like a year and a half ago.
Gone around the corner.
Where did the
Right there.
The contaminated PCBs went to the landfill in Missoula, and then over across the site behind us, out the back door over there, about a half a mile, that's where the clean material for backfill came from. And that material was tested before it was brought over here to make sure that it was clean and not have PCBs in it. And then on number 2 and number 3, they're just kind of out in the area right here to the left side of the bus, past these big pieces of concrete. There's 2 locations out there. You'll see on your little list there, it says it exceeded the screening level, the EPA screening level, but the numbers were low enough that it did not exceed the action level, which is where you start your cleanups. So there was PCBs out there, but not contaminated enough to justify any kind of cleanup. Does anybody have any questions while we're at these? Does anybody have any questions while we're at this spot?
How were the PCBs stored when they brought them to the landfill?
Where were they what?
How were they stored? Where at the landfill?
How at the landfill?
You said the PCBs were brought to the landfill.
Yeah, they were
contaminated
taken
soil?
to the like there was contaminated soil.
Right.
So the PCBs are in the soil.
Right.
They're dug out. They're hauled by truck with covers on them to the landfill. Then they're spread out at the landfill, and the landfill has a permit from DEQ to accept PCBs up to 50 parts per million. And those PCBs were between like 7 and 9 parts per million. But they're all licensed. Some of the PCBs we cleaned up at Bonner went there, but the really hot stuff at Bonner, it has to be shipped to a facility all the way in Idaho. So if it's below 50, it can go to the Missoula landfill. And that's where these PCBs did. And then by paying the tipping fee and stuff, now the landfill's responsible for that material into perpetuity. Of course, they're in engineered cells with liners and monitoring and all that, because they have a permit from DEQ to have a landfill, and they have licensed operators to operate the landfill. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
So any other
Possible source of those PCBs.
So the possible sources are some of the equipment in the old days had oils in them. There was electric motors and stuff like that, and those oils would leak. And up until 1977, PCBs were in a lot of oils and stuff. And so that's where they came. And like the spot that Sarah just walked out to, the deepest was only 8 feet deep. So a little bit more oil in that particular area probably released to get that deep. So, but yeah, mostly from like the end of World War II until 1977, they would put PCBs in oils and hydraulic fluid, gasoline, diesel, stuff like that.
So you said under 50 parts per billion, right? Billion with a B.
50 parts per million.
Oh, under 50
Million.
parts per million.
Right, and on your sheet here, when they look at the data on the stuff, and they said it's above the action or above the screening level. The screening level is in parts per billion, but the action level is in parts per million. What the screening level is, just to make sure folks like Sarah and I, Allie, project manager, when we see that data come up above a number like that we look a little closer, make sure that we're not having a problem, or if we are having a problem, then we have to address it.
Yeah, maybe we should.
The action level is somewhere between parts per billion.
down there.
Probably so done to us. What's that? Well, I mean, steel, you get what you make out of steel either.
Okay, so now we're at 5 and 6. Number 5 is this concrete pad right here. There used to be a building right there. And what that was is transformer building. When the transformers inside the facility would go bad or anything, and they were leaking the oils and stuff, they would store them there so they could be taken off site for proper disposal. Well, some of the leaking transformers leaked onto that concrete pad and then out into the dirt. So some more PCBs above the action level were found right there, so they dug them out right there. And then number 6 is a sample point, just like right over here someplace, and it's kind of like number 2 and 3. It was above the screening level but below the action level. But that spot by the concrete pad, it was above both, so they did a removal right there, and also sent that stuff to the landfill. Sarah's gonna walk out there and show you right where the removal was at.
And what is the screening level and what is the action?
We'll do it both in parts per billion. So the screening level's like, I think around 100. I'd have to actually look the number up, Vicki. I can't remember exactly. I know where to look it up. And then the action level's more like 700. That's in parts per billion. So we're talking the same thing.
So walking around with
But
her too.
that PCB fact sheet that Sarah's coming out with pretty soon, it's got all that detailed information on there. So don't quote me. Those are ballpark numbers. I mean, I know where to look them up if I have the right piece of paper in me, but there's too many numbers to remember it all in your head. Anybody else have any questions? You can. Sometimes you can, and it'll soak into the concrete. We saw some of it like that at Bonner because the concentrations were so high, but the concrete will be really black and you can tell it's stained with oil. So if you chip off the little top of the concrete and you sample it, you'll find the PCBs in it. But we don't see any dark staining on there. It's just enough to cause a problem in the soils, but is there a long time. But see, the thing is, they didn't have the transformers. They always needed them up and running. So as soon as one went bad, they were trading out and getting it off site and getting a new one. And you got to remember, yeah, there's still transformers all over the place that still have PCBs in them that are 50 years old. They just never have gone bad and leaked. So if everybody that owns those transformers, mostly Northwestern Energy, does things right, they're all registered with the EPA and TSCA program. So as soon as one goes bad, they have like a certain time period they have to switch them out. So no, they usually go to a different facility because they actually can get rid of the oil and recycle the transformer.
Where are we going next?
Back down the way she came. Go back down the white
know that road.
Yeah, I know, right?
I'm gonna have you ask a question about PCB.
You guys are going to get to see the back of the paper machine building 3 times. It came in the wrong door.
That's okay, Larry can tell 3 stories.
Yeah.
So Keith, there was a question about PCBs moving in the soil. Can you talk a little bit about PCBs, what we found on site, what we found in the water where...
So the question is, usually like PCBs moving in soil. So PCBs like to adhere to organic matter really easily. So once they hit the soil, they usually like bind up with organic matter in soils and stuff. So unless you have a large quantity, like hundreds and hundreds of gallons of oil, usually your spills will be pretty small because they won't spread real fast. But they can get to groundwater and stuff. We had real bad groundwater contamination at the Bonner mill because there was so much PCBs there and a lot of oil was spilled there. This site, we're not finding it. I mean, there's one well, at the next stop, we'll stop by well 2. And there was one hit of PCBs in there that was not an estimated hit. The lab actually reported a number. The thing is, it was below the DEQ 7 standard. So if something's below the standard, we don't have any legal authority to do anything about it. Now that well's been sampled since that time and has come back clean. And so sometimes you just don't know what's going on with the data when the numbers are that low. It's kind of that's why we try to sample for multiple years. It's to establish some kind of trend.
The building over here in front of the bus right now, and it'll be on your right, is a OCC plant. It's an old corrugated containers, and the mill recycled boxes and in this plant, and you put the pulp in another high-density storage tank, and then that would be used in making the paper in the paper machine. So they were using 20-30% recycled fiber in making their linerboard when they got this plant operating.
And when was that, Larry? When did that plant come online? All right.
Now you're testing my memory. I can't remember that far back.
1990s, I think.
Well, it was in the 90s or maybe even late 80s they might have had that plant.
This is where the belt throws were.
Now there was 3 ditches that came out of this, out of the mill, and were intercepted and went into this building over here, which has lift pumps in it, or had lift pumps in it, that pump the wastewater to a clarifier, 200-foot diameter clarifier. You can
Larry,
see,
can I, when you finish speaking, then we're gonna let people get out here so they can see this area, all right?
oh, okay.
Can you take that with you?
Yes.
Let
Yes.
us get out of the bus and so we can get around and listen to
This
Larry.
building right on your immediate left was a sludge dewatering plant that was put in late after I retired out here, and they took the sludge from the clarifier and dewatered it to the point where they could burn it in the waste fuel boiler. So this was a sludge dewatering plant at the tail end of the operation of the years that they operated out here. Inside the mill, there was a whole network of sewers in there, so any spills that took place would go into the sewers. And then there was 3 major ditches that came out of the plant, and there's an intercept ditch here that goes right across to this gray colored building over here, brown colored building, and the wastewater would be lifted with lift pumps into the center well of the clarifier. And it's a 200-foot diameter clarifier. The wastewater would slowly move out toward the outside of the clarifier and go into a laundry ring. And then there was a rake that went around in the bottom of the clarifier and moved the sludge to the center of the clarifier, and then pumps would pump that out. Initially they went to sludge ponds, and then more recently they went to the sludge dewatering plant here. And most of that material was going to be fiber. So it was basically the fiber, just like if you were to take a cardboard box and wet it and make a mush out of it, you'd get your fibers back. So the forces that hold the paper together in linerboard, there's not really a chemical bond there. There's just a hydrogen-oxygen bond that, you know, you make it with water to form the paper, and you can reverse that by wetting the final linerboard and get back to pulp again. So it's not a bond that's a chemical bond that you can't break. Now they could put wet strength in the linerboard and make it a chemical bond so it would hold up when it got wet. But we didn't do that for only a few customers. Lettuce boxes in California required wet strength, so it would hold up when they loaded the lettuce into the boxes out in the field when it was wet. So are we going to walk over to the clarifier? Yeah. Okay.
We can. Let's go.
So the question came up, could this be turned into a sewage treatment plant? So Larry's going to explain the hows and the whys of that.
Well, it's not likely to happen. You got to remember that this piece of equipment has been sitting here since 2011, and it's rusting, and you just don't go in and turn the switch and start things up. So it would take a major renovation to ever convert this back into a working clarifier. Now, I explained a little bit about it. I'll repeat it again. You can see where the paddles on the arm that goes along the bottom of the clarifier, they have little scrapers on them that was scraping the sludge to the center well, and the center well is underwater right now. But anyway, the pumps in this building right behind you here would pull the sludge out and pump it to a sludge pond, of which one of them is over there. And then the clarified wastewater came off in the laundry ring. You can see this ring that goes around, and then the water from there went by ditch over to the aeration basin. And if you turn around and look north or west, you'll see some structures out there. Aerators were mounted on those structures to mix air into the wastewater. So the clarifier was primary treatment. The aeration is secondary treatment. Same thing the Missoula sewage treatment plant does. And then from the aeration basin, it went to some settling ponds to remove the biosludge that was created during the aeration process. And then the water actually came by here and went into pond 1, which is where we're going to go the next, when we get back in the bus.
Larry, how deep did you say this was, or have you told us?
What?
How deep is this, or was it?
How deep is this?
Yeah.
Well, you can look on, looks like about 10 foot on the outside, probably 15 foot in the center.
Okay.
It was filled though?
What's that?
Was it always filled?
Yeah, well, it would always run full because you had water coming in and you were overflowing these little V notches here. You see these little V notches around this plate here? That's where the clarified water would come out. And so you had to have it full in order to clarify the wastewater.
Is the outside channel for overflow? Is this outside channel for overflow?
Yeah, the outside, what we call the launder ring that goes all the way around, that collects the clarified material that overflows those little V notches. And then if there was anything floating on top, it would skim off in this little device here and then come off into a load locker bucket over here, like tin cans or whatever, foam. So there'd be some stuff on top that would be removed that way.
Yeah, there's a sludge pond here on the right, and then coming up here, also on the right is Landfill A. And then on your left here, where you see these wood chips, old wood chips, this is sludge pond 3. Just on this road.
Thank you.
That's been covered with wood chips because right when they quit operations, it started to dry out and was causing dust problems. That's not a permanent cap. If you look on the right side here where landfill A is, where this mound is, that's more of a permanent cap. It should be rounded like that, have vegetation, then the water can drain away from it, not intermix with the waste that's inside there. Yeah, and it has, Larry says it has 18 inches of clay, also went down, then the topsoil on the top for the grass, so that will shed the water away.
Just crossed over the 100-year floodplain, but right back across here.
This is pond 1 here, directly to your right, and then again, that dike that you see up there is the 100-year floodplain as it is shown right now on the maps.
Thank you, Larry.
Everybody get some pictures, are you guys ready?
No.
So Sarah,
Yes.
how high was the water in this area with the high water mark this year? Did the water come up?
The
Did the
water
water come
never
up?
came past the first berm. It never came out
But
of the
it never.
river.
The water table never rose up to raise.
Oh no, you can see where we did actually have water in these ponds.
Okay.
And you can see where they were. You could see to the edge of the vegetation.
Right. So the groundwater did raise up
Yes.
and over, but the
Yeah.
water didn't come over.
Oh,
The
God.
groundwater came up.
Yeah.
Year flood. Last spring when a 30-year flowed, none of it. I mean, you'll see when we come around the corner out by the river, we'll show you some spots where the water rose. It rose more due to the groundwater, not the river. The river never came inside the site this year.
So would you please say that louder? The question is how high?
Please use the microphone.
We're doing that right now, Sarah.
Jerry, let's wait till we come around the corner when we're by the river. Then we can show them how high the river got up on the berm. It never went over the top of the berm and got into the 100-year floodplain. But
So Sarah, another question: what's the electric fence for?
So there was a question why you're seeing an electric fence throughout the site. And that is because there is a rancher that runs cattle out here.
While we're stopped here, this is O'Keefe Creek over here that flows through the property. And it flows year-round. Sarah, I noticed Keith is unlocking a gate here to control the cattle. I didn't think there was any more cattle allowed out here.
so for you guys on your left, that all out there, all those fields, that's all part of OU1. And then on your right, this is OU3. So this is the edge where the holding ponds were, is on your right. and part of the operations in OU1 was just fields. There was some dirt material borrowed out of there. That's why you see those mounds. They did some excavation for clean material back in the day. But otherwise, that's all OU1. That's all clean out there.
What's OU1 stand for?
Operable unit number 1. So it's the ag lands around the outside of the property. And then operable unit 2 is right where the mill buildings were. And then operable unit 3 is where these ponds and stuff were at.
This pond on your right is 1A. So we just went by pond number 1, and this is 1A.
I don't know that it gets into the river.
These were settling ponds. And that was, but it was the wastewater that was primary, the sludge removed in the clarifier, gone through the aeration basin, and then came out here to the settling ponds. And worked its way basically west. And the main outfall was way down at the other end, downstream. And we'll get to that one at some point on the tour. And there was outfall number 3.
Was that just natural flow, or were there pumps involved?
No, it was all gravity flow. Everything was gravity flow from the clarifier. Everything downhill from the clarifier. Now the road that goes down this way on your left right now is the road to the well field. And that's where the 9 deep wells are located, but we're not going to have time to go and cover everything.
However, I will point out, if you look down there, you can see one of the blue buildings. That is associated with a production well. So if we went down there, headed down that way, we would see a number of those buildings. And each one of those buildings had a production well associated with a production rate of about 20 million gallons a day.
Cool. Much more than Zula's whole.
What's become of that water right
Right. So on your tour list stuff, we're kind of stopped at the spot for like 11, 12, and 13 Oak Creek, Lavelle, and the deep wells. And like Sarah said, those deep wells are way over there, kind of by where that green building is. And then Lavelle Creek comes in from the east. It crosses underneath Mullen Road just before you get to Primrose if you're driving back to town. And then it comes into the site from way over there through OU1. And then right in front of us is Lavelle Creek. And then, O'Keefe Creek, sorry. And then this water area right here in front of the bus driver, this is another one of those borrow pits where they used to take gravel out. So that's just, because they dug so deep, that's the groundwater naturally exposed right there in that gravel pit right there. Yeah, they just took some water samples out of it like a couple weeks ago. But we never expect anything to be over there because all the water for treatment was on the right side of the bus in OU3. So we don't expect that to be contaminated. That was just a regular gravel pit thing that they had on site, and they had a permit with the state and all that. Does anybody have any questions why we're at this spot?
Did the
Vicky?
big production wells create a cone of depression that could have pulled any water that way?
Yeah, they had a big cone of depression, but I don't know. Larry, do you know if they any suspicion of that?
I don't think the cone of depression came up this far. Each well, when you pump, has a cone of depression, and it's the deepest part is right at the well itself. And those wells are 150 foot deep. They're down in the deep aquifer, and but there is some connection between the upper aquifer and the lower aquifer when you pump. And so you'll draw some of the upper aquifer down into the lower aquifer in a pumping situation. So there is a deep test well between here and the deep wells. There may have been a slight amount of sodium increase in that, but not a significant amount.
And then another thing is that all the wells in OU1 that were tested, they've always come up clean. For 4 years and 6 sampling events. Now we have a 7th sampling event that happened in June of 2017, but we don't have the data back yet, though David did tell us that he got it validated just last week. But all the contaminated wells are out the right side of the bus. that we've ever seen on the site. So nothing over here in OU1. That's always been clean, and like Larry said, there's some test wells over there by the production wells, way over by that green building. You can't quite see them. You might see one or two if you have eagle eyes, but there's little silver buildings, and there's 6 of them, and that's where those pump houses were, by that green building over there. So that's quite a ways over there. But yeah, there was a Kona depression, Vicky, but not enough. It's too far. It's just too far away. Plus, remember, the groundwater's going towards the river, but just before it gets to the river, it also then heads north with the river. So in the closer you are, another reason that those wells are over there is because they're so close to the river. There would have been a lot of water in the groundwater, because it's so prolific right there, as you know. So, any other questions while you're here, Sarah?
And you mentioned that we had groundwater data from June of 2017. That's actually June of 2018, and that data will be out shortly.
Yeah, right.
For review.
Yeah, 2018. I'm sorry. Good catch, Sarah.
Thank you.
As usual, I'm talking too much. Here, Larry, you take over.
Okay. By the way, those deep wells, when they were installed, they were able to pump 2,000 gallons a minute, each one of them. So when you put 9 of them together, you can get a big volume of water, but they didn't pump them all at the same time. And eventually those wells will start to seal off. So those wells won't pump 2,000 gallons a minute now after many years of operation. They have done some cleaning on those wells to improve the pumping, or the volume that they pump. I couldn't tell you how successful that was, but I know that there was some treatment of the wells to try to open up the openings at the bottom of the casing.
What were the wells used for?
What's that?
What were the wells used for?
Well, we needed water. The paper mill used 10 million gallons a day. So that's where the water came from. We needed that much water just to operate the process. And then, of course, we have 10 million gallons a day of wastewater.
All right, there was a couple other questions that I'm going to respond to. One, there was the question asked about the railroad beds that are located on the property. Have they been sampled? They were sampled in 2015. There are railroad beds located in OU1 that belong to the railroads. They are located on the other side of the highway from the plant itself. The railroad companies have done some soil sampling on those railroad beds, but the agencies have not overseen that sampling. So we'll be looking at resampling those railroad beds in the future. The reason I talk about them is they are part of OU1. The third question was about the transformer station located on site. We went by it right at the beginning of the tour. And the question was, did we see contamination associated with that transformer area, power station area? The Montana Power and Northwest Energy has just completed a review of all of the documents, all reporting incidents to the state. There were no spills reported to the state during the operation of that substation. We're trying to determine if we need to do additional sampling associated with the substation. So we haven't got that far. It's a good question. We did do the record review of it.
This is the side channel of the river on your left here, and it forms a little island out there, and then it joins one of the main stems of the Clark Fork down here. And this dike that you see coming up on your left is the area that the river flows right directly into the dike, and that's an area that we did a lot of riprap to protect the dike. And you can see there's still quite a bit of stone there. It hasn't washed it away yet. But the main channel is over against the bank. And And it's only when the river comes up that it flows on this channel.
Could you
here and
stop
goes
the
right straight.
bus?
Stop. People want to take a picture of the beaver dam.
You want to stop the bus?
Anybody want to find the beaver dam? And everybody, all right, so I would like to point out that we are looking at the beaver dam. It was much larger last year. Of course, it was wiped out during the flooding this spring. The other thing that I think is important to look at here is how the landscape, and I know you may not have seen it, but the impact that the high water had this spring on this area. The number of trees that are gone, just the movement of soil. So at the high peak, we had 57,000 CFS coming past the plant site. What was amazing to me is that it is so wide between here and the mountain that it was all water. It was absolutely amazing to me how much water was going down the river at this point. But we'll move farther up. We'll get out of the bus so you can see how far the water came up on the berm. Thank you very much. You can move on now.
This is pond 2 on your right. This is a 100-acre pond out here. This is one of the ponds that we had a discharge point on. Outfall number 1 is on the far corner of this pond. And the reason we had to discharge from this pond is because we couldn't put everything from pond 2 into the sequence, the flow sequence, to get it down to outfall number 3. Yeah, see, this wasn't the main channel. The main current is over there.
So we're not going to get out of the bus, but here's the place where you guys can see. So you see this new sand where there's not a lot of grass right outside the water? At the top of the sand where the grass starts again, during the high 30-year flow this year, that's all the higher the water got up on the berm. So there's still what you call 10 feet of freeboard was left of this berm. And now we're on the outside Clark Fork River berm. So there was a lot of it. Even if it got up to 100 foot, the new model shows there would still be 2 to 4 feet of headboard, depending on where you're at along this berm. Maybe if we're having a 100-year flow instead of a 30-year flow. Because, like Sarah said earlier, the water was just over the top of that island and just the willows were sticking out in the water and the trees, and the water was clear across to the bottom of the mountain. And it was loud, but it was all contained right there. But the main energy of the river was on the far side because this island was helping to dissipate the energy coming against this berm. And that island's natural.
Now normally there'd be a little colored water in this backwater. And so I'm pleased to see there's not any color in there. You remember the concern earlier when one of the dikes were leaking and there was coffee colored water outside of the dikes? Well, I said that this has been going on for 50 years and it's because of the leaching of the color bodies from our percolation through the ground matter. And that material is slowly going to leach away, and it indicates now that maybe we're getting to that point where most of that color has been leached out of the ground water, and because I'm not seeing any color out there. So normally this would be tea color in this backwater.
So just out of interest, how high was the water, the groundwater coming up over in the ponds compared to where it is now? Because obviously if it's coming in, it's going up and then it's got to come out. So
There wasn't any real ponded water right here, right outside the bus, but when we get around the corner, we'll show you a spot, and then it had come up about 2 feet. The groundwater will naturally rise with the river water. And so it came up a few feet, and we'll point some stuff. Most of it's around the corner, and then when we get to pond 13A, about 2 miles down the berm down there, we'll stop at that location too and show you some more where some water was and where it's not anymore because it all has gone back down.
So when it goes down, is it drawing anything into the river then? As the water drops down and recedes, is the water going into the river? Is there anything being...
Well, we tested it in May and those samples came back fine. So whatever, it didn't have contamination. It had some dirt in it because the dry dirt would have got pushed up and turned it tea colored, and then when it went back down. But you'll see, like Larry said, that side channel looks clear again.
Right.
But then it's been a long time, you know, enough months since high flow, everything's settled again. Yeah, and many years since the plant's been operating. In the groundwater, in the groundwater well was the only one that had an exceedance of like arsenic. All the surface water, including the elevated pond water, which was elevated, it was all okay.
So Keith, we're stopping at 2A, right?
Well, I thought you wanted to stop at the tension crack.
Oh, well, that's fine. It's across from 2A, though.
Okay, so this will be a place where we get off the bus for just a couple minutes. There's people that wanted to see the tension cracks on the berm. They're now behind us. So bail out of the bus and walk to the back of the bus. They'll be on the right-hand side of the road. You'll see a little pink flag, and the tension cracks are running parallel with the road. And then the ponded water from the gentleman's name, just asked the question, see the little ponds of water out there now? Where they used to be a lot bigger this spring. That's where the water came up, and you see all that green grass? Those little ponds right there, well, they used to be connected this spring during high flow. So on your sheet, we're at 15, 16, and 17. And then number 18, the outflow is just right over there, but the tension cracks that people were interested in are right behind the bus. So we can all get out for a minute again.
Sarah, is this what you're... Sarah, is this
Yes.
what you're looking at?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, there's one.
But
That's
they're
what happened
pretty
is...
small.
I see.
Oh, yeah, they
happened
were
is the
very,
water-
very, very small.
It looks like what happened is the moisture in the water, or the rainwater, has saturated the soil again and they started to close up, but there's part of one right there. But they used to run from the front of the bus where that pink flag is over there, down to wherever this other pink, well, there's a pink flag, and I thought there was one right over there.
We actually dug down into the berms. We took soil samples to see if there was contamination. And we also did some well work associated with the berms. So when you see the areas that are disturbed along the berm here, that's where we were actually doing the studies on the stability of the berms.
How far did you go down?
Oh, sorry. How far did we go down? I believe that we actually went to the bottom of the berm.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
So
you
what's
went
that
down
white
at least
pipe
10
over
feet
there
then.
for? So on the news, they talked about that gravel or more material was brought in to reinforce the berm. Where was that added?
That's down at 13A, 13 and 13A, and we're going to stop and see that.
Okay, thank you.
So if we could just get on the bus now, and we'll move down that way. The berm is actually 4.5 miles long.
Okay, this is outfall number 1 that we discharged wastewater from pond 2. And then there was a building there that we had a sampler in there, and we measured the flow, and so that was the track of everything we discharged out of there. And the only reason we used outfall number 1 is because we couldn't get all the wastewater from 2 into the stream going down to outfall 3.
And then the fishing sampling location was right on the left, right below outfall 1.
Well, the ponds were built in sequence. The mill started off with no ponds at the beginning, and so untreated wastewater went right straight to the river, and fish kill happened, and then that's when they started building the ponds. So they built them in sequence. So the major pond building was when they put in the number 3 machine, which is about 80, 90 in there. And then they built, 2 and 13, 13A, and the big, really big ponds. Well, if you see pipes along here extending out of the ground, they're test wells.
That's what I thought.
And we had a series of test wells that we monitored along between the ponds and the river on a regular basis, and that became part of our monthly reporting. And then since the EPA has moved on site, they've put in multiple more test wells all over the place. I don't know how many you got in here, sir?
I'm not exactly sure. I know we're monitoring 49.
So they're monitoring 49 test wells. So they've got at least 49 wells located throughout the plant site. Here's a test well coming up right here on the left in front of the bus.
So Larry, so for you guys on your list, where we're at number 23. So test pit 17 and borehole 17. That's why the ground on the road's a little roughed up, because they would have dug down and test pit and sampled that and then filled it back in.
What was the test pit for?
To test both geotechnical of the berm and to take samples to see if it's contaminated. But see, we never really expect the berms to be contaminated because they use the material from the ponds over here on the right to build the berm before any kind of water or anything ever got there. And so far the test results show that the berm's not contaminated. Mostly the berm study is to figure out the stability and how fast could it erode from high flow of the river. Because it is a man-made structure, and slowly over time it will wash away. It's not going to last forever. So that's part of it. But the test pits, instead of just doing borings, you know how you don't always get good recovery from your borings? So sometimes you also do a test pit right next to it, so you can do that comparison to see for geotechnical stability reasons.
So the berm study I saw said that overtopping was not very likely, but destabilization of berms was a real concern. The berm's so tall that 100-year flow, it doesn't look like anywhere would it overgo the top, but the water could be up against the berm for a long enough period of time to saturate the berm and then make it weak, and then it could start to erode faster. So if you had a really long high flow season, which we did in 2011, remember how long it was? This year was actually kind of short compared to 11, as amount of days it was, but then you could have a problem if it got up there and saturated it with water from the left side moving towards the right side. Plus then the groundwater could come up on the right side and saturate it from the other side, both sides, and then it could potentially turn to mud and be weak. Any other questions before on the next stop here? Pretty soon, we're not too far for another get out. I know it's getting kind of hot in here. We're almost going to get out again. I just wanted to point out that on the left here, this old area where you see this water and stuff, during high flow, the groundwater would come up in this pond, and then in the next pond on the left, that was actually backwater from the river. And you'll see that it came up a long, long ways compared to where we finally end up stopping. So everything on the left during high flow was like 2 or 3 feet of standing water right there.
Well, I testified at the county commissioners when they had the hearing on whether or not to put that on the ballot, and I brought this point up that this area out here is eventually going to become available, and I'd like to see restoration, and the open space bond might come and be important in purchasing some of this land out here. The Grass Valley French Ditch put into Pond 18, and that fills up half full during the year, and then it gradually will seep away during the winter time, but it is an excellent pond for ducks and shorebirds. And that's what I'd like to see happen there to that one. And so that water that went into the wetlands would then go into Pond 18.
Okay, we can get out here. Let's see where we're at on the list.
This is where you put the dirt in, isn't it?
Almost to 28.
So we're gonna be, we just had crossed over that little last bumpy part was 23 and 24. So now we're at pond 13, 13A, kind of close to the tea-colored water. And then outfall 3, which is number 28, is the green building right there. So 13A is off towards the right and behind us like. And then 13's right here on the right, and I see that I see 2 or 3 of Sarah's turtles on the logs out there. And I'm not kidding, they are out there if you look. We'll get out of the bus and you guys can walk around here. Immediately off the bus, out the front door, this is where the Corps engineer suggested the fill be put in. Sarah can explain more about that when we get off the bus. And then the tea-colored water was in this area too, right in front of the bus to the right and some to the left. So that's what Travis and the county wanted sampled. And then the 13A is out there at that green building. So we'll get out here for 10 or 15 minutes and everybody can stretch your legs a little bit.
I see I can see one head. Yeah, there's one out there. That's all I see is one out there. That in this area here, during the flooding in May, we actually saw some bubbling of groundwater coming to the surface. We could actually see soil flowing in that water, which is a concern. So we brought in approximately 3,000 to 4,000 cubic yards of material right through here to put some pressure down on the bottom of the pond, prevent that groundwater from bubbling up, carrying surface soils. So all of this material right in here is new to this pond since May.
Sarah, who paid for that?
The potential responsible parties were responsible for conducting this work and paying for it. Now I'd like to point out on the other side of this berm is where you saw the tea-colored water in the photos on the news. So let's walk over here. So what actually was happening here, the water from the river was actually backing up through into here. The tea-colored water was closer to the river by that old tree there, down that way. And that's where you saw the tea-colored water. But what was amazing to me is how far the river water had come up through here and covered all of this grass and vegetation. So this is where we were actually doing some sampling on the river. We can point it out when we get farther down there by the discharge point. But this was the major concern. What was happening? Did we see contamination from 13A moving towards the river?
Did they put fill over here?
No, there was no fill put over here. The only work that we actually did on site during that removal was right to the on my right hand side here in 13A. Any other questions about that removal?
Have they gotten the results back from the sampling that they did?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And we published that, and we saw some elevated metals in that material. There was a little copper. There was manganese, arsenic.
We commented on it.
Yes. There was dioxin, but the dioxin was no higher up gradient than down gradient. And dioxin, that's not surprising. Dioxin is just in everyday life anymore. You see very low levels of dioxin, and we did see it. Did we see a clear pathway from here into the river? I'm not saying that we could say that right now, but what I will tell you, and I truly believe this, is that we did see material from the operations of the plant entrained in the grasses and soils along this area. When it flooded, it mixed with the water, and we started to see the tea-colored water. People tell me all the time that when the plant operated, if you floated the river, you saw that tea-colored water coming down the 4 miles of the berm.
Wow.
Yes. Associated with the trees. So.
Thank you.
Earlier you said at an earlier meeting that tea-colored water was primarily lignin.
Correct.
Now is lignin water soluble? It's hard to think that that's water soluble. So what's the carrier for it?
So think about this. Have you ever been to a swamp and you've seen it, that brown color associated with rotting trees, a lot of vegetation? It's very similar to the same that you see it in the Everglades. You can even smell it. It's typical of the same process, that there were so many trees here on site, and that water did carry the lignin did get into the soil, lays in the grass, and so if you have moisture or the river coming in, it will remix with the water and will mix with the water, and you'll see it, and you'll see that brown color. Does that help at all?
Yeah.
The question was, how many ponds have been sampled? And we actually have those sample maps with us, so I can show you the map.
Okay.
So, and one of the things is we're trying to put these information out for your phones. Does that work for a lot of people?
Yeah.
You know, some of us are into the 21st century. Some of us aren't.
That thing was just barely underwater enough. You could still see the yellow through the tea-colored water, but so the high flow water just barely was over the top of that yellow cap right there. So you can tell there was a lot of berm left to go before it would have flooded the site.
Unless it saturated,
Unless it
destabilized.
came underneath,
Yeah,
right.
Anyway, this is outfall number 3, and this building here housed the measurement of the flow, and we took samples, and it went out into a diffuser. This, and what I mean by a diffuser is that the pipe went out and had several outfalls points along the pipe, so it would actually help mix the wastewater when it entered the river. This is what we call Mark Your Slough that takes off down through here, and I suspect that they sampled that slough for pike for one of their samples. Is that correct? Anybody? Sarah, is that right?
Yeah, I think
Apparently the pike like the slower slack water, and this is an area where they would have sampled the pike. This particular fence along here was a fence that I put up for habitat to keep the cows out of the island out here. And interesting thing about it, that cable that I put on the top, I put that on there specifically to keep the elk and deer from knocking the fence down.
So I'll point out as we go down the little hill off the berm here, we're going to go down onto the 100-year floodplain, and then out to the right. This is the last of the holding ponds right next to the river.
Well, actually,
Well, there's one more 18 over there.
18, you look way off in the distance over there, about a quarter mile, that's where the 100-year floodplain is.
Jerry, lift it up.
Here,
They want to stop.
And then off to the left here, just across the fence at the end of the slough, that was another fish sampling location on the river right there.
Here's another test well coming up on your left. You can see the pipe sticking out of the ground with a cap on the top. That's one of the original test wells we had. That is one of the EPA test wells. Again, this dike to your right is the 100-year floodplain, and that's the edge of Pond 18. This is
Larry, this is
outfall number 4. This is where this blue shack is. And this was clean water coming out of the mill that only had heat in it. And we were to cool it down to ambient condition before we released it back to the river. I see there's some flow in there, which I'm a little surprised at. So it must be the Grass Valley French Ditch is making its way through the wetlands and coming out 004. But here's the wetlands. They're still
Weeks wetland, everybody.
they're still wet.
I was proud of these wetlands.
Hey, Keith, what's this structure back here? Is that a weather station?
That used to be our ambient test station, one of our ambient test stations for hydrogen sulfide.
Oh, okay.
air monitoring station.
Okay.
Now we're on the old Milwaukee right-of-way, the old Milwaukee tracks. The area to our left is owned by Dick Lucier. It used to be mill property, but it's now owned by Dick Lucier.
We should have a round of applause for our driver for getting us around on this. That's a story in itself, right?
Let's see, we're at number 35. The solid waste basin G is right here on your right behind that yellow sign where that little mound of dirt is right there. That's the one landfill that they still could use if they need to, but since they're not doing anything at their property, they said they haven't put anything there in a couple of years, so, but that's where G is, so that's number 35 on your maps and stuff and on your list.
We could remove color from the wastewater in that color removal plant, and we pumped it back into the mill for treatment.
So are these the rapid infiltration basins here?
They're all over the place. This is one right here to the right. And then there's another one up here on the left. You can see the berms around over here toward that barn. There's another rapid infiltration basin.
How were those used?
We would put water into those, well, they were gravel. We found gravel and we diked around it and then put water in there periodically. We would put water in there and let it drain away and then repeat the process. And we were hoping that they wouldn't seal off. But it turned out that the colored material in the wastewater was gradually plugging it off, and it wasn't a long-term solution. Here's the color removal plant on the right. All it is used for storage for Dick Lucier's trucks.
Big truck.
So,
Oh, this is interesting cloth.
hey Larry, I couldn't hear back here how the color removal process worked. Did you talk about that?
We had some chemicals to the wastewater that would coagulate the color bodies in there, and they would float to the top, and we would skim it off, and that would be pumped back into the mill for burning, and then the clear water would go out to the storage ponds.
Okay.
It was some of the same chemicals that are used on drinking water to cause color and other things dissolved in the water to form a flock and then be skimmed off. So it was the same stuff used in drinking water treatment.
And that was to remove the tannins and the lignins?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Brown stuff.
Right off to your left, you can see those structures out there. Those were where the aerators were mounted, and it was just a disc, a cone-like disc with paddles on it to agitate the wastewater and mix water into the wastewater. And there were several of them. You can see there's, I can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 structures out there.
Go by the paper building again, one more time.
Would people like to see where the asbestos landfills are? Yes. That's the last thing. So we're going down there. That's where we're going, and we're finished.
Good.
Most of the chipping operation has been removed, but it was back over there on the left. They had the big log deck out there and the big chipper. And the chipper ended up going up to Kamloops, I think up in British Columbia. Oh, That's just junk.
Pallets.
There's always lots of junk around the pulp mill. We have boneyards all over the place.
So the asbestos landfills are right in front of us.
Right on the
So
right.
on the would be on the right hand side here. You can see the cap. You can see the yellow signs that are posted on the fence. And then there are some of these that are capped with clay. So if we went a little farther down, you would actually still see clay piles they use for capping of the landfills.
Hold on, we're gonna
The deer are running and jumping into
across
our
the
house.
asbestos field.